My daughter-in-law has broken into my apartment repeatedly. Not once, not twice, but 36 times in just 5 months. I know the exact number because I kept track. I logged the dates, the times, what she touched, and what she took. When I finally confronted her and told her to stop, she laughed right in my face. She told me I was overreacting. She said I was losing my mind in my old age. She claimed she had every right to be there because we're family. So I did what any rational man in my position would do. I quietly moved out. I didn't say a word. I left all the furniture behind, left the keys in her possession, and I waited. A week later, at 2 a.m., a silent alarm triggered on my phone. In that exact moment, everything changed. And in that same moment, she finally realized she hadn't broken into her father-in-law's home at all. She had just broken into a corporate asset owned by a multi-billion-dollar investment firm, and the police were already on their way. Before I tell you how I set this perfect legal trap for my own family, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. And if you believe respect is earned, not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Gideon Cross. I'm 72 years old. To my son and his wife, I was just a retired old man living in a Gold Coast apartment in Chicago, killing time with chess and old memories. They looked at my gray hair and my slow pace and assumed my mind was just as sluggish as my body. They thought I was weak. They thought I was an easy target. They couldn't have been more wrong. For the past 40 years, I worked as a forensic auditor for some of the largest corporations in the country. My job wasn't to be nice. My job was to find the cracks, to uncover the missing funds, hidden assets, and lies buried under mountains of paperwork. I spent my entire career catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. I hadn't lost my touch. I had just shifted my focus from corporate fraud to family betrayal. It all started on a chilly, windy Tuesday afternoon in October. My chess club at the library wrapped up an hour early due to a broken heating system. I took a cab home, looking forward to a quiet afternoon with a book. I lived in a pre-war building on Lakeshore Drive, a place with a doorman, heavy oak doors, and a lot of history. It was the home I shared with my late wife, Catherine, for 30 years. It was my sanctuary. Or at least it was supposed to be. The moment I stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor, I noticed something off. The small brass deadbolt on my front door was vertical. I always leave it horizontal. Always. It was a habit drilled into me from decades of handling sensitive documents. I stood in the hallway, my heart rate steady. Panic is for amateurs. Observation is for professionals. I pushed the door gently. It was unlocked. I didn't call out. I walked in, my footsteps disappearing into the thick Persian rug in the foyer. The apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. There was a scent in the air that didn't belong, a sickly sweet, cheap, floral perfume. It was Rachel's perfume, my daughter-in-law. I walked toward the master bedroom. The door was cracked open. Through the gap, I saw her. Rachel was standing in front of the full-length mirror. She had opened the cedar wardrobe where I kept Catherine's things, a wardrobe I hadn't opened in the 3 years since she passed because the grief was still too sharp. Rachel was wearing Catherine's vintage mink coat, the one I bought for her in Paris back in 1985. It was pristine. It was sacred. And there was Rachel, wearing it over her yoga pants, turning side to side, admiring herself in the glass. She ran her hands down the fur, assessing it, pricing it. There was no respect in her eyes, only greed. I cleared my throat. In the quiet apartment, the sound was sharp. Rachel jumped, spinning around with wide eyes. But she didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed, as if I were the intruder. "Oh, Gideon," she gasped, "you scared me. I thought you had chess until 4. She didn't take the coat off. She stood there, wrapped in my wife's memories, looking at me with a defiance that made my blood run cold. "What are you doing here, Rachel?" I asked. My voice was level. I didn't raise it. "I'm just helping you declutter," she said, waving her hand carelessly. "I have a key, remember? Travis gave it to me for emergencies. I figured I'd come by and help you organize. This place is like a museum, Gideon. You have so much old junk just gathering dust." "You're wearing Catherine's coat," I said. "Someone should enjoy it," she replied, smoothing down the fur. Mom is gone, Gideon. It's been 3 years. Locking it up in here is just a waste. It's vintage. It's worth a lot. Or it would be if you didn't let it rot in this closet. I was just checking the condition. Take it off, I said. She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at me, in my own bedroom. You are being so dramatic, she sighed. She pulled the coat off and tossed it carelessly onto the bed, where it crumpled. My hands twitched, but I kept them clamped at my sides. Leave, I said, and leave the key on the table. Rachel laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. I can't leave the key, Gideon. Travis insists we keep it. What if you fall? What if you have a stroke? You're 72. You aren't in your prime anymore. We need access. I am asking you to leave, I repeated. Fine, she said, grabbing her purse and brushing past me, intentionally clipping my shoulder. You know, we're just trying to help you. You should be grateful you have family who cares enough to check on you. Most old men rot alone for weeks before anyone notices. She walked out, letting the front door slam behind her. I stood in the bedroom for a long time. I went to the bed, picked up the coat, and folded it carefully. I put it back in the cedar wardrobe and locked it. Then I went to my study. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small black notebook. I took my pen and wrote down the date. October 12th, 2:30 p.m. 36th intrusion. Unauthorized entry into master bedroom. Tampering with personal property. Hostile and entitled attitude. I sat there looking at the list of 36 entries. She had been here while I was at the grocery store. She had been here while I was at the doctor. She had been here while I was out for walks. I knew because I tape-honed the bottoms of drawers. I placed hairs across the seals of jewelry boxes. I aligned papers on my desk with geometric precision. Every time I came home, something was off. A drawer was open a fraction of an inch. A file was shifted. A piece of jewelry was turned. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't checking on my health. She was hunting. She was taking inventory. She was appraising my estate while I was still alive and breathing, and today she had grown bold enough to do it when she knew I might come home. She was testing my boundaries, and she had decided I was a toothless old man. That night, I called my son Travis. He's 35, a high school history teacher. He's a man who hates conflict more than he loves the truth. I told him we needed to have a family dinner tonight. I ordered from their favorite Italian place and set the table. I wanted to look into their eyes. They arrived at 7 p.m. Travis looked tired. He always looked tired these days. Rachel was radiant, acting as if she hadn't been caught violating my privacy just hours earlier. She walked in and kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. She even complimented the wine. We sat down. I waited until we were halfway through the meal. I want my key back, I said, setting my fork down. The table went dead silent. Travis stopped chewing. Rachel exhaled, putting on an expression of deep, practiced patience. Dad, we talked about this, Travis said, looking at his plate. It's a safety issue. It's a privacy issue, I corrected. Rachel was here today. She was going through your mother's closet. She was wearing her coat. Travis looked at Rachel. She didn't even blink. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Honey, I told you, she said to him. I went over to do a little light cleaning. The dust in that place is so bad for Gideon's lungs. I was just moving things to wipe down the shelves. I tried on the coat for 2 seconds to see if it needed to be dry cleaned, and your father started screaming at me. He's getting confused, Travis. He seemed really disoriented. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. I hadn't screamed and I wasn't confused. She's lying, Travis, I said calmly. She wasn't cleaning. She was shopping in my closet. Dad, Rachel said, her voice dropping to a whisper, using the tone you'd use with a toddler. You're starting to forget things. Last week you forgot to turn off the stove. We found it when we came by, remember? I hadn't left the stove on. I never used the back burner. They had turned it on. I saw it clearly now. They were gaslighting me. They were building a case for my incompetence. I didn't leave the stove on, I said. See? Rachel said to Travis. He doesn't even remember. It's getting worse, honey. We can't give him the key back. If he falls in there and locks us out, he could pass away alone. We have to be responsible. We have to be the adults here. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I sat with when his heart was broken for the first time. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say his father was the sharpest man he knew. I waited for him to tell his wife she had no right to touch his mother's things. Travis looked up at me. His eyes were begging. He didn't want the fight. He was afraid of her, afraid of losing her approval. "Dad, just let her keep the key, okay?" Travis said. "It's for your own good. She's just trying to help. You're getting older, and we just want you safe. Please don't make a big deal out of this." In that moment, my heart broke. It didn't make a loud sound. It just cracked quietly and permanently. My son was gone. He wasn't my ally. He was her accomplice. He was weak. And in my line of work, a weak link is a liability that must be managed. I looked at Rachel. She was smiling at me, a tiny, triumphant smirk. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted an old man. She thought I was cornered. I took a sip of my wine. I let the silence stretch. I let them think I was accepting my defeat. I let them think I was accepting my decline. "You're right," I finally said, my voice soft. "I suppose I am getting older. I suppose I do forget things. Maybe it is best you keep the key." Rachel squeezed Travis's hand. "See? That's much better. We'll take care of everything, Gideon. You don't have to worry about a thing." I nodded and finished my dinner. I listened to them talk about their summer plans. I listened to Rachel talk about how they needed a bigger house. I listened, and I calculated. They thought the conversation was over. They thought they had secured their access. What they didn't know was that the moment I said, "You're right," I stopped being their father and father-in-law. In that exact second, I became the auditor again, and they became the subjects of an investigation that would end in their complete ruin. An hour later, I saw them to the door. I hugged my son, feeling the tension in his body. Deep down, he knew he had betrayed me, but he didn't have the courage to face it. "Good night, Dad," he said. "Good night, Travis," I replied. "Drive safely." Rachel patted my arm. "We'll come check on you tomorrow," she said. "Don't throw the deadbolt." "I won't," I promised. I closed the door. I heard the elevator chime. I waited until they were gone. Then I threw the deadbolt. I put up the security chain. I walked back to my study and opened my notebook. I turned to a fresh page and I wrote down the date. I wrote down the objective: liquidation of assets and removal of hostile elements. They wanted the apartment. They wanted control. They wanted the inheritance. They saw me as an aging, confused obstacle standing between them and a fortune they hadn't earned. They thought they were playing a game of patience. They didn't know I was playing chess, and I was already 5 moves ahead. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang twice. "Cole," I said when the voice answered. "It's Gideon. I have an assignment for you. No, not corporate. Personal. I need you to set up a blind trust, and then I need you to find me a rental apartment. Yes, I'm moving tonight." I hung up and looked around the apartment. It was filled with 40 years of memories. It had been beautiful, but now it was compromised. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a trap, and I wasn't going to be the mouse. I was going to be the one who snapped it shut. I went to the bookshelf and pulled out a hidden mini camera I had used in a fraud case years ago. It was the size of a pinhead. I walked into the living room and installed it inside the frame of the portrait from Catherine's and my wedding day. The lens was aimed perfectly across the room. If Rachel wanted to come in, I would let her. I would make her comfortable. I would let her think she owned the place. I would let her build her own downfall out of her own greed. I poured myself another glass of wine. I sat in my leather chair in the dark, watching the Chicago city lights flicker outside. I was alone, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt incredibly focused. They wanted to strip me of everything. They were about to learn that when you strip a warrior of his armor, you don't make him vulnerable. You just make him lighter and much, much faster. The next morning, the real work began. I didn't wait for them to come back, and I didn't wait for the next break-in. I initiated the protocol. I treated my own life like a crime scene, and I began securing the evidence. First thing the next morning, I went to the bank. I didn't go to the neighborhood branch where Travis knew the tellers. I went straight to the downtown headquarters. I demanded to see the regional manager, a man named Henderson. A decade ago, an internal audit I conducted cleared his name. He owed me one. Gideon, Henderson said, shaking my hand, it's been years. You look great. I need to move my liquid assets, I said, getting straight to the point. All of them, today. Henderson looked at me, saw the expression in my eyes, and stopped smiling. Is something wrong? No, I said, but my security has been compromised. I need to move all my funds into a new trust, and I need to revoke any power of attorney that might be coming your way. Henderson nodded and tapped on his keyboard, then his brow furrowed. Gideon, someone checked on your safe deposit box yesterday afternoon. A Travis Cross called. He claimed he lost the key and needed to schedule a drilling. He said he had your authorization. My blood ran cold. Yesterday afternoon, before the dinner, before they tried to gaslight me, Travis was already trying to breach the bank. He wasn't just taking Rachel's side at dinner last night. He was an active partner in this plot from the very beginning. Did you grant him access? I asked. No, Henderson said. He didn't have the paperwork. He said he'd bring it in later this week. Lock it down, I said. Lock the box. No one gets in unless it's me, in person, with 2 forms of ID and a biometric scan. And Henderson, if he comes back, don't tell him I was here today. Tell him the box is frozen for compliance. Tell him it's a system error. Tell him anything, but do not let him know I'm on to him. Understood, Henderson said. I left the bank. My financial footprint was now invisible. Walking through the busy streets, the cold wind biting at my face, I pulled my coat tighter. I felt a grim satisfaction. Step 1 was complete. They could try to rob me now, but they would only find an empty vault. But the apartment was the real prize. That apartment was worth $2 million. It was the crown jewel. Rachel didn't care about my savings account. She probably had no idea how much was even in it. But she knew the value of Gold Coast real estate. She walked through those rooms and saw dollar signs. She wanted to renovate, to tear down walls, to erase me from that space while I was still drawing breath. I hailed a cab. I gave the driver the address to a law firm. Cole was waiting for me. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit. He had no family, no hobbies. He only had the law, and he wielded it like a scalpel. We're selling the apartment, I told him as I walked into his office. Selling it? Cole asked. Gideon, that's your home. No, I said. It's a battlefield. I want to sell it, but I want to do it invisibly. I want a sale-leaseback. I'm going to sell it to an institutional investor, pocket the cash, and rent it back as a tenant. On paper, I'll still live there. To the world, I'll still be the owner. But legally, I will just be a renter in a property owned by a massive, faceless corporation. Cole smiled. That's brilliant, he said. If they try to grab the deed, they'll find you don't have it. If they try to claim it as an inheritance, it's not part of the estate. Exactly, I said. And if they break in? Cole's smile widened. If they break in, they aren't breaking into an old man's apartment. They're breaking into a corporate asset. The penalties are entirely different. That brings in corporate legal teams. It turns a family dispute into a heavy federal offense. Draft the papers, I said. I want it done by Friday. Over the next 3 days, I moved my most precious belongings out of the apartment. I did it at night. I took them out in small bags. I moved Catherine's ashes, her photo albums, my journals, and the antique watch my father left me. I took them to a storage unit 3 miles away. I left the big furniture, the rugs, the old coats in the closet, the things that didn't matter. I left an illusion of a life. The shell was there, but the soul was gone. By Friday afternoon, the deal was done. The money, $2.1 million, was wired into the blind trust. I was officially a tenant in my own home. I was officially a millionaire who owned nothing on paper. Friday night, I went back to the apartment. I sat on the couch and waited. I knew they would come. It was the weekend, and they would assume I was asleep or occupied. At 7 p.m., I pulled up the feed from the hidden camera in the living room on my iPad. I was in the study with the door closed. I watched the front door open. Rachel walked in. She didn't knock. She used her key. She brought a man with her. It wasn't Travis. He was a guy in a black t-shirt and jeans, carrying a laser measure. This is the main hall, Rachel told him, her voice buzzing with excitement. We want to knock this wall out. Open it up to the kitchen. Do an open concept thing. It'll add 20% to the property value. The man looked around. Nice place, he said. When do we start? Soon, Rachel said. The current occupant is moving out shortly. We're transitioning him to a care facility. His mind is slipping. It's sad, really, but he just doesn't need this kind of space anymore. I watched them on my iPad from the study. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just felt a cold, hard clarity. She was planning to renovate my home while I was still living in it. She was planning to discard me like an old piece of furniture. I didn't walk out and confront them. That would make it emotional. It would make it messy. I let them measure, let them plan, let them dig their hole deeper. I saved the video file. I backed it up to the cloud. I labeled it Evidence Item 2, Conspiracy to Damage Property. I waited until they left. Rachel didn't even check to see if I was home. She assumed I was out or asleep or completely irrelevant. She locked the door behind her. I walked into the living room. I stood exactly where she had been standing. I looked at the wall she wanted to destroy. You want the apartment, Rachel? I whispered to the empty room. You want it so bad you can have it. Come and get it. I picked up my phone. I called a security company, a high-end firm run by a former intelligence operative I had audited years ago. I need an upgrade, I said. Silent alarms, motion sensors, and I want a smart lock that looks like a standard deadbolt. I want to be able to lock and unlock that door from anywhere in the world using my phone. When the agent asked when I wanted it installed, I answered, Tomorrow. I'm going on a trip, and I want this place secured before I leave. I was going to Florida, or at least that was the lie I planned to tell them. In reality, I was moving into a penthouse apartment directly across the street, facing my old home. I was going to have a front row seat to the show. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. An empty apartment, a confused old man out of the way, and a vault full of secrets. I packed my last bag. I took one final look at the lake view. Goodbye, home, I said. Then I prepared for the invasion. Inside my new penthouse living room, the faint glow of the iPad screen was the only light. I sat back in a leather chair, ignoring the water glass on the side table, and watched my old life get dismantled pixel by pixel. I had set the cameras to record whenever they detected motion, and the notification popped up at exactly 10 a.m. Safe in my new fortress across the street, I was invisible to them. But thanks to the pinhole camera hidden inside the frame of Catherine's wedding portrait, they were perfectly visible to me. Rachel walked into my apartment, completely lacking the stealth of a thief. Instead, she had the arrogant stride of a landlord. She wasn't alone. Following her was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a black turtleneck, wearing designer glasses and holding a massive architecture portfolio. He looked like the kind of guy who charges $500 an hour just to tell you your taste is outdated. I turned up the volume on the iPad. The audio was crystal clear. The microphone I installed was military grade, designed to catch whispers from across the room. This is the space, Rachel said, waving her arm across my living room. Her voice echoed slightly in the recording. It feels cramped right now because of all this bulky, ancient furniture. But I need you to visualize the potential. We need to open it up. I want air. I want light. I want the whole floor to breathe. The designer nodded, tapping his stylus against his chin. He walked over to the east wall, the one separating the living room from the study. He knocked on it with his knuckles. Is this load-bearing? He asked. Rachel laughed. It was a dismissive, careless sound. Who cares? If it's load-bearing, we'll put in a steel beam. Money isn't an issue. The issue is that this layout is stuck in the 90s. I want this wall gone. I want to be able to stand at the kitchen island and see the lake. I watched her place her hand on that wall. That wall. That was where I had recorded Travis's height every single year on his birthday, from age 3 to 18. The pencil marks were still there, faint but visible if you knew where to look, hidden behind the bookshelf I had moved just days prior. That wall held the history of my son's growth, a physical record of the years I spent raising him. And Rachel was talking about turning it to dust, simply because she wanted a better view with her morning coffee. I took my pen and opened my black notebook. I logged the time. 10:05 a.m. Target, Rachel Cross. Accomplice, unidentified architect. Action: conspiracy to commit structural property damage. The designer paced the room, looking at my things with the same disdain Rachel held. He stopped in front of the fireplace. The mantelpiece was hand-carved mahogany, imported from England by my grandfather. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. "This has to go," the designer said. "Too heavy. It swallows the room. We should replace it with floating concrete or a sleek, gas insert fireplace. Something minimalist." "Yes," Rachel agreed instantly. "Rip it out. It smells like old smoke and old man in here anyway. We need to gut everything. New floors, new molding, new lighting. I want recessed LEDs everywhere. No more of these dusty chandeliers." I felt a chill settle deep in my chest. It wasn't the heat of anger. I was past that. It was the icy calm of absolute certainty. They weren't just talking about a renovation. They were talking about an erasure. They wanted to wipe every trace of Gideon and Catherine Cross off the face of the earth. To them, the apartment wasn't a home with a history. It was an asset measured in square footage, currently being wasted by a relic. "What about the current occupant?" the designer asked, looking around. He lowered his voice slightly, though there was no need. "Is he on board with this? This is a massive project. There's going to be dust, noise, demolition crews. It'll be completely unlivable during construction." Rachel waved her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "Don't worry about Gideon," she said smoothly. "In fact, he's moving out shortly. We're transitioning him to a facility in Florida next week. He thinks it's a vacation, but let's just say he won't be returning to this address. He's checked out. It's sad, really. His mind is like Swiss cheese. By the time we're done, he won't even remember he ever lived here." I paused the video. I stared at my daughter-in-law's frozen face. She looked beautiful, poised, and utterly soulless. She had just pronounced my demise, not legally perhaps, but socially and functionally. To her, I was already gone. I was a problem that had been solved, a checklist item that had been crossed off. She wasn't planning a renovation for a father-in-law she cared about. She was building a nest for herself, right on top of the ashes of my life. I hit play again. I needed to hear it all. I needed the full audit trail. "What's the timeline then?" the designer asked. "We start the second he leaves for the airport," Rachel said. "I want the demolition crew here the next morning. If we move fast, we can have the walls down before his flight even lands. Once the demolition starts, there's no turning back. Even if he throws a tantrum, he can't live in a construction zone. It'll force his hand." It was a tactical strike. She was smarter than I gave her credit for. She knew possession was 9/10 of the law, and destruction was the other 10th. If she made the apartment unlivable for an old man, I would have no choice but to go where she put me. She was weaponizing the renovation to evict me. I watched them walk into the dining room, the room where Catherine and I had hosted 30 Thanksgiving dinners, the room where we toasted Travis's graduation. "This room is useless," Rachel said. "Who uses a formal dining room anymore? We should turn this into a media room, or a playroom for when we eventually settle down and have kids." She didn't even have children. She didn't even like them. But she knew the prospect of a grandchild was the soft underbelly of most grandparents. She had likely used that exact line to get Travis to agree to this madness. The designer pulled out a laser measure. He began shooting red beams across the room, noting numbers. He was calculating the cost of pushing me over the edge. "What about the budget?" he asked. Rachel hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled, a predatory expression. "Don't worry about the budget," she said. "We can tap into the equity of the place. Once the old man is in the facility, we'll get the power of attorney. The place is completely paid off. We can easily pull out a few $100,000 for the remodel. Just make it look expensive. I want people to walk in here and know we have money." I wrote that down, word for word, in my notebook. Intent to defraud. Intent to misappropriate funds. Premeditated exploitation of a vulnerable adult. They spent another 20 minutes walking the apartment. They went into the master bedroom. Rachel sat on my bed, the bed I had shared with my wife, and bounced slightly, testing the mattress. "This needs to be hauled away," she laughed. "A California king, something modern. And this wardrobe," she pointed to the cedar closet where she had been caught wearing the coat. "This needs to be doubled in size. I need a walk-in closet. knocked the wall back into the hallway. She was planning to destroy the cedar wardrobe, the one place I kept sacred. I leaned back in my penthouse chair. My hands were steady as I closed the notebook. The video feed showed them leaving. Rachel locked the door behind her with my key, the key I had supposedly allowed her to keep because I was too old to manage my own security. Before leaving, she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her hair. She looked pleased with herself. She looked like a woman who had just secured her future. She had no idea she had just starred in the most incriminating piece of evidence I had ever compiled. She thought I was the victim. She thought I was a confused old man headed for Florida. She didn't know she was the prey. I saved the video file. I encrypted it. I sent a copy to the secure server at my lawyer's office. I sent another to a cloud account only I could access. Then I stood up and walked to the penthouse window. I looked across the street at the apartment building. I could see the windows of my living room. It was dark now. It looked peaceful, but inside, the ghosts were being evicted. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the professional obligation of an auditor, correcting a bad ledger. Rachel and Travis were liabilities. They were bad debt. And any good auditor knows you don't negotiate with bad debt. You just write it off. You liquidate the assets, and you close the account. I picked up my phone and called the security company again. "Move the installation up," I said. "I want the system live tonight." "But Mr. Cross," the technician said, "we're still configuring the protocols for the silent alarm." "I don't care," I said. "Do it remotely. I want that apartment turned into an iron trap before midnight." There was a pause on the line. "Understood, sir. We'll make it happen." I hung up. I poured the water out of my glass into the sink. In its place, I poured a small splash of scotch. I toasted the dark windows across the street. "Go ahead, Rachel," I whispered to the empty room. "Tear down those walls. Plan your media room. Spend the money you don't have. You think you're remodeling a home? You don't realize you're building your own cage." I took a sip of the scotch. It was sharp and pure. I checked my watch. It was noon. I had 12 hours before the trap was fully active. I decided to spend the afternoon reading the fine print of the insurance policy on that apartment. I wanted to make sure that when the police kicked the door down, the damage wouldn't be covered. I wanted to make sure every single cent of the destruction she caused came directly out of her own pocket, because that is the only way you hurt someone like Rachel. You don't scream at them, you don't argue with them, you just hand them a bill they can't afford to pay. I sat there for hours, the silence of the penthouse wrapping around me like a shield. Yes, I was alone, but I was powerful. As the sun began to set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the lake, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The game was in motion. Now it was my turn to move. At 11:15 a.m., the phone rang right on schedule. I was still sitting in the penthouse, looking at the digital surveillance feed of my empty apartment across the street, but I picked it up on the first ring. Only 5 people had this private line. 2 were dead, 1 was my son, 1 was my lawyer, and the last was Robert Henderson, the senior branch manager at First National Bank of Chicago. "Gideon?" Robert's voice was tight. It was the voice of a man accustomed to whispering in marble hallways. "We have a situation at the downtown branch. I think you need to get over here right now." I didn't ask what the situation was. I didn't ask if it could wait. In the high-stakes financial world, a situation meant an unauthorized breach, and a breach meant someone was trying to put their hand in my pocket. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I hung up and put on my dark gray overcoat. I checked my reflection. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man about to launch a hostile takeover of his own life. The cab ride to the financial district passed in a blur of gray concrete and steel. I used the time to take inventory of my liquid assets in my head. My portfolio wasn't just a retirement fund. It was the result of 40 years of catching thieves. I invested in the companies that survived my audits. I bought distressed assets during the savings and loan crisis in the 80s. I quietly built a fortune that Travis knew absolutely nothing about. He thought I lived on a pension and Social Security. He thought that apartment was my only asset. He was about to find out he had been trying to rob a fortress with a plastic spoon. When I walked into the bank, the security guard nodded to me. I didn't stop at the teller counters. I walked straight to the glass elevator and hit the button for the private wealth management floor. Robert met me at the door. He looked pale. He was a good man, someone I had mentored and saved from a career-ending mess when he was a junior analyst, caught up in a corrupt vice president's schemes. He never forgot it. "Come into my office," Robert said. He pulled the blinds shut. That was never a good sign. He pushed a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. It was a standard safe deposit box access form. Box 404. My box, the one containing the original deed to the apartment, the bearer bonds, and the physical ledgers of my offshore accounts. I looked at the document. It was stamped with today's date, 10 a.m., in the applicant slot. The name read, Travis Cross, and at the bottom there was a signature, Gideon Cross. I stared at that signature. It was a careful imitation. He got the slant right, he got the loop on the G right, but he pressed too hard on the downstrokes. He hesitated on the double S. It was a forgery, and it wasn't just a fake document. It was a betrayal, written in blue ink. "He came in an hour ago," Robert said softly. "The form was notarized. He claimed you were too ill to come in yourself. He said you needed documents from the box for an emergency medical procedure. He was very convincing, Gideon. He was crying. He said you were in the hospital." I tasted something cold and metallic in my mouth. My son walked into a federal bank and declared me practically incapacitated just to clean out my vault. He wasn't just taking his wife's side at dinner. He had become the architect of his own criminal blueprint. "Did you let him in?" I asked. The paper in my hand didn't shake. "No," Robert said. "I flagged it. The notary stamp looked fresh, but I ran the commission number. It belongs to a notary who passed away 3 months ago." I looked up at Robert. Travis hadn't just forged my name. He had used a stolen or counterfeit notary seal. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This was a heavy federal offense. This was bank fraud. "Where is he now?" I asked. "I told him the vault timer was having a mechanical issue," Robert said. "I told him he'd have to come back tomorrow. He was angry, Gideon. He was desperate. He was sweating. He kept checking his phone. He said he had to have the contents today or what?" I pressed. "Or he'd lose everything," Robert finished. He muttered something about a deadline. I leaned back in the leather chair. A deadline. That explained the urgency. That explained the renovation plans. That explained the gaslighting. Travis wasn't just greedy. He was in debt. Deep debt. The kind that doesn't send you monthly statements, but comes with threats. He needed my money not to improve his life, but to save it. And he had decided my life was the price he was willing to pay. I took one more look at the forged document. I pulled out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of it. Evidence item 3. Attempted bank fraud. "Robert," I said, "I want to execute the protocol." Robert blinked. "The blind trust?" "The blind trust," I confirmed. "Are you sure?" Robert asked. "Once you do this, Gideon, you lose control. You can't touch the money. You can't withdraw it. It goes to a third-party administrator. You'll be a beneficiary of your own wealth, but with zero authority to move the assets. It's a one-way street." "I'm certain," I said. "Liquidity is vulnerability. As long as that money is in my name, as long as it can be accessed with a signature, Travis will keep trying. He'll try to declare me incompetent. He'll try to get a power of attorney. He'll try to forge more documents. I need to remove the target. I need to make myself broke on paper." Robert nodded slowly. He pulled up a file on his computer and printed out a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "This transfer includes all liquid cash?" Robert asked. "Everything," I said. $8.5 million. "And the securities?" "All of it. The municipal bonds, the blue chip stocks, the index funds. Move it all." "And the beneficiary structure?" I looked at the paperwork. I took the pen. "During my lifetime, the sole beneficiary is Gideon Cross," I said. "Upon my passing, the trust dissolves. The assets are completely liquidated, and the entire amount is donated to the Forensic Audit Foundation for the Prevention of Financial Abuse Against the Elderly." Robert paused. He looked at me. "Nothing for Travis?" I looked at the forged signature on the desk. Travis has already taken his inheritance, I said. He took it in the form of the education I paid for. He took it in the form of the cars I bought him. He took it in the form of the love I gave him for 35 years. He's already spent it all. There's nothing left. Robert didn't argue. He understood. He began processing the transaction. I spent the next 2 hours signing my name over and over again. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting. I was cutting the financial umbilical cord. I was turning off the tap. When the last document was signed, Robert stamped it. "It's done," he said. "The funds are moving. When you walk out of this building, your personal accounts will show a balance of 0. Your debit cards will be declined. You'll be issued an allowance card from the trust with a strict monthly limit that cannot be exceeded. To anyone looking at your credit report, anyone looking at your bank statements, you are now just an old man living on a fixed income. You are untouchable." "Thank you, Robert," I said. "What about the safe deposit box?" he asked. "Drill it," I said. "Empty it. Send the contents to the trust custodian, but leave one thing inside." "What's that?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a silver dollar coin. It was the first dollar I ever earned when I was a 10-year-old paper boy. I had kept it with me ever since to remind myself of where I came from. "Put this in the box," I said, "and leave a note." I took a piece of bank stationery. I wrote 3 words: "Earn your own." I pushed the note and the coin across the desk. "If he comes back," I said, "let him open it. Let him see that." Robert took the coin. He looked sad. He looked like he wanted to say something about family, about forgiveness. But he took one more look at the forged signature and kept his mouth shut. I stood up, buttoning my coat. I felt lighter. I wasn't a target anymore. I was a ghost. "One more thing, Robert," I said at the door. "If anyone asks, if any lawyers call, if the police ever investigate, tell them I was here today, but that I was confused. I was agitated. I closed the accounts because I was paranoid." Robert frowned. "You want me to play into their narrative?" "I want you to set the trap," I said. "If they think I'm losing it, they'll get careless. If they think I'm sharp, they'll be cautious. I want them careless." Robert nodded slowly, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "You're a dangerous man, Gideon." "I'm a thorough man," I corrected. I walked out of the bank and into the wind of the financial district. The sun was high and bright, reflecting off the glass skyscrapers. I checked my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Rachel, 2 from Travis. They were panicking. They must have tried to use the secondary credit cards I gave them years ago for emergencies. Those cards were dead plastic now. I didn't call them back. I walked to a hot dog stand on the corner. I bought a Chicago-style hot dog with everything on it. I sat on a concrete bench and ate it. It cost me $5. It was the first thing I bought with my new allowance card, and it tasted like freedom. Travis was desperate. That was a variable I hadn't fully calculated until today. Desperation makes people dangerous. It makes them irrational. The fact that he tried to rob a bank in broad daylight with a fake seal meant the clock was ticking faster than I realized. He owed money to someone who didn't care about family dinners or legal processes. And now, Travis couldn't get cash. He couldn't open the box. The only thing he had left, the only asset he could see, touch, and potentially liquidate, was the apartment. He didn't know I had already sold it. He didn't know it belonged to a corporation. To him, it was the final lifeline. He was going to make a run for it, and he was going to throw everything he had into taking it. I finished my lunch and wiped my mouth with a napkin. I looked up at the skyscrapers around me. They were monuments to power, money, and leverage. I understood this world. I knew how to use its weight to crush an insect. I hailed a cab. "Gold Coast," I said. I needed to get back to the penthouse. I needed to check the cameras. Now that I had completely cut off the cash flow, the rats were bound to get hungry, and hungry rats don't wait for an invitation. They chew right through the walls. I leaned back into my seat as the cab merged into traffic. Closing my eyes, the image of Travis opening that safe distribution flashed in my mind. I pictured that silver coin. I pictured that note. This isn't cruelty, I firmly told myself. This is an education. I am teaching him the lesson I should have taught him 20 years ago. You don't take what isn't yours, and if you aren't prepared to starve, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. The cab pulled up in front of my new building. I tipped the driver, walked into the lobby, and greeted the concierge, who only knew me as the quiet tenant in 4B. I headed upstairs into my fortress, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the surveillance monitors. The apartment across the street remained quiet. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It looked so peaceful. It looked so vulnerable. But it was a minefield, and I had just armed the final detonator. I checked the silent alarm status. Activated. Smart lock status. Locked. Motion sensors. Calibrated. Everything was in position. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Rachel. Just one line. I'm heading to the airport now. Florida is beautiful this time of year. Don't worry about the place. Everything is taken care of. I tapped send, stared at the screen, and waited. 10 minutes later, a notification popped up on my iPad. Motion detected at front door. I leaned forward. The camera feed came alive. It was Rachel. She was standing in the hallway, reading the text on her phone. She held it up to show someone standing just out of frame. Then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smirk of a butcher looking at a lamb. She reached into her purse and pulled out the key. My key. She slid it into the lock. The show was about to begin. I picked up the phone and dialed a number that wasn't in my public contacts. It belonged to Marcus Thorne, a real estate broker who handled confidential matters. 10 years ago, I uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme inside his firm that would have landed him a lifetime federal sentence. It turned out he was framed by his partner. I proved his innocence. At the time, he told me if I ever needed a ghost apartment, all I had to do was call. It was time to collect on that favor. I need an apartment in Sovereign Tower, I said when he answered. Specifically, I need a north-facing unit with a direct line of sight to the 12th floor of the Regency building. Marcus didn't ask why. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just tapped on his keyboard. Unit 14B is available, he said. It's a furnished, vacant corporate rental. The lease is held by a Delaware shell company. No names, no credit check needed. Just wire the funds. I wired the money within 5 minutes using my new allowance account. Before 2 p.m., a courier delivered a keycard to my concierge. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. That tiny piece of plastic unlocked my new command center. Sovereign Tower sat directly across the street from my old place. From the living room of 14B, I could see inside my own apartment as clearly as if I were watching a television screen. It was a perfect vantage point, a sniper's nest. Next came the hard part, the extraction. I couldn't hire movers. Movers talk, they leave paper trails, and they attract the attention of the doorman. And the doorman would talk to Rachel because Rachel slipped him $20 tips to buy his silence every time she barged into my home. I had to do this alone, and it had to be at night. I waited until the city slept. At 2 a.m., the building was as silent as a tomb. The doorman was on break or dozing in the back office. I took the service elevator. It was an old iron cage that creaked and groaned, smelling of cleaning fluid and motor oil. It was the artery of the building that residents ignored, making it the perfect route for a phantom. I bought a mountain of heavy-duty black trash bags and 3 featureless duffel bags. I didn't pack clothes. Clothes are replaceable. I didn't pack kitchenware. I could buy new plates. I packed the things that hold the weight of a life. First, I went to the cedar wardrobe. I took Catherine's urn down from the top shelf. It was heavy, crafted from polished marble. I held it in my hands for a moment. The stone was cool. I remembered the day I brought her home. I had promised her I would keep her safe. Leaving her here in a place Rachel treated like a cheap discount boutique felt like a violation of that promise. I wrapped the urn in a thick wool sweater, placed it gently in the center of the first duffel bag, patted it with my socks, and zipped it shut. It looked like gym gear, completely unremarkable. Next were the journals. I have written in a journal every single day since 1978. They aren't diaries filled with emotional musings. They are logs. They contain the details of every audit I ever conducted. They hold the names of men who went to prison because of my mathematics. They contain the secrets of half the boards of directors in Chicago. If Rachel or Travis found them, they wouldn't understand them. They would probably just toss them in the dumpster. But to me, they are my legacy. They are the proof that I kept my eyes open in this world. I stacked the leather-bound notebooks into the second bag. They were heavy, packed with ink and truth. I lifted the bag. My shoulder protested, but I ignored it. Pain is just information. You can choose to acknowledge it, or you can choose to complete the objective. I chose the objective. Finally, the watches. My father was a train conductor. He left me a pocket watch that had clocked nearly 40 years on the rail lines. Over the years, I added to the collection. A Patek Philippe I bought when I became partner. A Rolex given by a client. They sat in a velvet-lined box in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't take the box. It was too bulky. I took the watches out one by one, wrapped them in microfiber cloths, and slipped them into the interior pockets of my overcoat. I felt the weight of them against my ribs. Time. I was literally carrying time. I made 3 trips across the street that night, walking into the lobby of the Sovereign, up to the 14th floor, and into the sterile beige luxury of the corporate rental. I placed the urn on the mantelpiece of the faux fireplace. I stacked the journals in the closet. I put the watches in the safe provided by the rental agency. By 4 a.m., my muscles burned. My knees were stiff. But I wasn't finished. The extraction was only half the mission. The other half was staging the decoy. I had to make the apartment look lived in. I had to make it look like I had stepped away for a week, not vanished forever. If it looked abandoned, Rachel might get suspicious. She might realize the rules of the game had changed. I needed her to believe she was the predator, and I needed her to believe I was the oblivious prey. I returned to the old apartment one last time. I walked through the rooms. I adjusted the blinds. I left them cracked open just enough to let light in, and just enough for me to see inside from across the street. I went to the kitchen. I left a coffee mug in the sink. I left a plate on the counter with a few crumbs scattered on it. It was a calculated mess. It suggested a man who had eaten breakfast and rushed to catch a flight. I went to the bathroom. I left my toothbrush in the holder. I left a prescription bottle for blood pressure medication on the shelf. It was empty, of course. I had transferred the pills to a plastic bag in my pocket, but the bottle remained as a visual cue of my vulnerability, a reminder to them that I was old, sick, and dependent. I went to the bedroom. I stripped the sheets off the bed and threw them into the hamper. I left the duvet looking rumpled and messy. It looked like a bed that had just been slept in. It looked private and exposed. Then I went to the study. This was the most critical part of the staging, the safe. It was a heavy steel wall, safe installed behind an oil painting of a ship at sea. It was an old-fashioned mechanical dial, completely free of electronics. Travis had tried to crack it before. I had seen the scratches on the dial where he had attempted to guess the combination. He didn't know the code was the date of my very first fraud arrest. I opened the safe. It was empty now. The bonds were gone, the cash was gone, the deed was gone. I placed a stack of documents inside, old tax returns from the 90s, useless, outdated, but official-looking and thick. On top of them, I placed a small metal box. Inside the box, I put a collection of costume jewelry Catherine had used in theater productions. Glass diamonds, plastic rubies. In the dark, under the beam of a flashlight, to an untrained eye, they would sparkle like a fortune. I closed the safe, spun the dial, and locked it. It was the perfect decoy. It was heavy, locked tight, and rattled when you shook the door. It promised wealth, promised answers. It would keep them busy for hours. It would keep them in that room long enough for the police to arrive. I stood in the center of the living room. The sun was beginning to turn the sky gray over the lake. The apartment felt dead. The soul was gone. It was just drywall and parquet flooring now. It was just an asset. I looked at the wall Rachel wanted to tear down. I ran my hand over the drywall. I felt the ghost of those pencil marks where Travis had grown. I remembered measuring him. I remembered his excitement when he gained an inch. I remembered the boy who wanted so badly to be taller. I didn't hate that boy. I missed him. But the man he became, The stranger who forged my name and looked forward to my passing, that man was not my son. That man was a defendant. I walked to the front door. I checked the new smart lock installed just hours earlier. A green light flickered. It was online, connected to my phone. I could lock or unlock it with a tap of my thumb. I stepped into the hallway. I closed the door. I heard the heavy, definitive slam of the deadbolt sliding into place. I didn't look back. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and walked past the sleeping doorman. Crossing the street to Sovereign Tower, I went up to 14B, locked the door, and threw the deadbolt. I walked to the window, lifted the high-powered binoculars I bought that afternoon, and focused on the 12th floor across the street. I could see my living room. I could see the painting of the ship hiding the safe. I could see the coffee mug left on the counter. It was a perfect diorama, a dollhouse waiting for destructive children to come and play. I sat down in the leather chair by the window. I was exhausted. My body ached in ways it hadn't in 20 years, but my brain was wired. I felt an adrenaline rush sharper than any caffeine. I was ready. I picked up my phone, opened the security system app, and checked the status. Armed. Silent mode. Active. I opened the hidden camera app. The feed was live. The image crystal clear. I was no longer Gideon Cross, the retired father. I was Gideon Cross, the auditor, and I was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of my career. I poured a glass of water, took my actual blood pressure medication, and watched the sunrise reflect off the glass of my old home. The trap was set. The bait was in the cage. Now I just had to wait for the rats to get hungry. And I knew with the certainty of a man who deals in numbers that hunger is a constant variable. They wouldn't wait long. They were desperate, they were greedy, and they were stupid. A lethal combination. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the exhaustion wash over me, but I didn't sleep. I rested, saving my energy because when that alarm triggered, I needed to be sharp. I needed to be precise. I was the spider, and the web was twitching. The technician had arrived at exactly 8 a.m. His name was Silas. He was a man made of right angles and silence, a former military communications specialist who transitioned into high-end private security. I had audited his company 3 years ago. I found a discrepancy in their payroll that was draining their funds, a ghost employee created by their own CFO. Silas respected me because I found the phantom. I respected Silas because he knew how to run a wire that the human eye couldn't detect. I led him into the empty apartment. The morning light hit the bare floors where the rugs used to be. There was a slight echo in the rooms, an emptiness that pleased me. It sounded like a stage before the actors arrived. "I need the full setup, Silas," I said, "but I need it invisible." Silas didn't ask questions. He placed his black toolbox on the kitchen island and popped it open with a series of clicks. Nestled in the foam inside were the components of my new reality. Sensors, cameras, microphones, and the brain of the system, a black box no bigger than a deck of cards. We started at the front door. This was the fatal point of failure for my son and his wife. They had a key. Rachel had fought for that key. She believed it was her scepter of power, giving her the right to walk into my life whenever she pleased. I needed to turn that key into a weapon against her. Silas removed the old deadbolt cylinder. It was brass, scratched from 30 years of use. He replaced it with a biometric smart lock housing that had been custom machined to look exactly like the original vintage hardware. To the naked eye, it was just an old lock, but inside, it was an encrypted digital fortress. "Here's the beauty of it," Silas said, his voice low and gravelly. "We program the cylinder to accept the physical key profile she has. So the key turns, the deadbolt slides back, and the door opens." "And then?" I asked. "And then the countdown begins," Silas said. "The system recognizes that the door was opened mechanically, but it wasn't disarmed digitally. A standard user would enter a code or use a fob. An intruder just turns the key. The system gives them 30 seconds to authenticate. If they don't, it doesn't beep. It doesn't flash a red light. It just wakes up." That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to scare them off at the threshold. I wanted them inside. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them deep enough into the apartment that they couldn't claim they just made a mistake and walked into the wrong unit. I needed them committed. We moved to the hallway. Silas installed motion detectors inside the crown molding. He drilled pinhole-sized gaps, inserted the fiber optic lenses, and filled the seams with a putty that matched the paint perfectly. He worked with the steady hands of a surgeon. "These are thermal," Silas explained. "They don't just see motion, they see heat signatures. They can tell the difference between a curtain blowing in the wind and a human body moving toward the master bedroom. They map the route. We'll have a digital trail of exactly where they went and how long they stood there." I watched him work, thinking about Rachel walking down this hallway days ago, criticizing the wallpaper and planning which walls to destroy. She had walked with such confidence, stomping through my home. Soon every step she took would be recorded, time-stamped, and uploaded to a server she couldn't touch. Next was the living room. This was where I placed the bait, the safe. I had moved the truly valuable items, but the wall safe behind the painting remained. I need the system to treat that room as a high-security zone. Silas installed a vibration sensor on the wall safe itself. "If they touch the dial," Silas said, "it triggers a Tier 1 alert. If they try to drill it, it's a Tier 2. If they try to pry it open, it's a Tier 3. "Explain Tier 3, I said. Silas stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tier 3 is the panic protocol," he said. "It bypasses the monitoring center. It bypasses the polite confirmation call to the homeowner. It sends a digital data packet straight to the Chicago Police Department's emergency dispatch." I nodded. "But burglary calls are low priority," I said. "It could take 40 minutes for a car to arrive. By then, they're gone. I need the police there in 5 minutes. I need lights and sirens." Silas looked at me, hesitating. "There's a way to escalate the priority code," he said slowly, "but it requires a specific configuration. We have to program the system to report the intrusion not just as a property crime, but as a crime against a person." "I am a 72-year-old man," I said. "Allegedly, my mind is slipping. Allegedly, I live here alone. If someone breaks in at 2 in the morning, the system shouldn't assume it's empty. It should assume I am home and in danger." Silas understood. He tapped a few keys on his tablet. "I can set the profile to occupied vulnerable resident," he said. "If the alarm triggers between midnight and 6 a.m., the system sends a code that translates to home invasion in progress. In Chicago, that's a Tier 1 priority dispatch. It assumes a hostage situation. It brings the cavalry." "Do it," I said. "But Gideon," Silas warned, "if you do this and nobody is actually home, the police aren't going to be happy. That's a massive deployment of resources." I looked him in the eye. "Who says nobody is home?" I asked. "My legal residence is right here. My furniture is here. My toothbrush is in the bathroom. To the police, this is my domicile. If I happen to be traveling when they break in, that's my good fortune. But it doesn't change the nature of the threat. They don't know I'm not home. Their intent when they break in is to confront a confused old man. That's a home invasion, Silas. The victim's absence is a technicality." Silas stared at me for a long time. Then he nodded and entered the code into the black box. "It's done," he said. "Priority 1, home invasion protocol. If they breach after midnight, the cavalry is coming." We finished the installation in the study. I had Silas place a high-gain audio microphone behind the radiator grill. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to hear their greed. I wanted to hear them argue over who got to keep the silverware. I needed the audio for the court case. Video shows the action, but audio shows intent. Audio proves malice. When Silas was done, he handed me a tablet showing a map of the apartment. Every room was a zone, and every zone was green. "It's live," he said. "You have total control from your phone. You can lock doors, shut off lights. You can even speak through a hidden speaker if you want to play the voice of God." "I won't be speaking," I said. "I'll just be watching." I paid Silas in cash. He packed his tools and paused at the door. "Whoever you're doing this to," he said, "they must have crossed a serious line." "Tamen po pi liao chi yue," I said. "They broke the contract." Silas nodded. He didn't need to know more, and he left. I stood alone in the apartment. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a machine, humming with invisible energy. The air was charged. It was a fortress disguised as a ruin. I tested the system. I walked to the front door and unlocked it with my phone. The deadbolt slid back silently. I stepped into the hallway and locked the door, watching the bolt click home. I walked down the hall to the elevator, waited a minute, and then walked back. I took out my old brass key, the duplicate of the one Rachel had, and slid it into the lock. The turn was smooth and the door opened. I stepped inside. I counted 1, 2, 3. Nothing happened. No sirens, no beeps. Just dead silence. I looked at my phone. A notification appeared on the screen. Unauthorized entry. Mechanical override. Timer activated. 27 seconds remaining. I waited. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. At 0, the notification changed. Silent alarm triggered. Protocol. Home invasion. First responders dispatched. I instantly cleared the alarm with my thumbprint before the signal actually went to the police department. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It worked. Perfect. Lethal. The silence of the alarm was the most terrifying part. When burglars hear a siren, they run. They panic, fleeing the scene. But when they hear nothing, they get confident. They think they bypass the security. They take their time, moving deeper into the house. They start looking for heavy things, making noise. And while they're feeling clever, laughing at the old man's lack of security, the police are quietly surrounding the building, cutting off the exits and moving up the stairs. It was a trap designed not to repel, but to capture, a trap engineered to maximize the consequences. I took one last look around the apartment. Back in the penthouse, the trap was built and the technology was primed. Now I just had to extend the invitation. I needed to let them know the coast was clear, using a lie to lure them into the net. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel's number. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound a bit weaker, more tired than usual. I summoned the frail old man they had convinced themselves I'd become. It was time to initiate the final phase. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted, so I could take away everything they had. I sat back in the leather chair. The city of Chicago laid out like a circuit board beneath my feet. The sun was dipping lower, casting long, dark shadows across the water of Lake Michigan. A glass of water sat on the coaster, and my phone was in my hand. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to become exactly who they thought I was, the confused, fragile, lonely old man shuffling off to Florida to wait out his days in the sun. I adjusted the collar of my shirt. It was a linen button-down, the kind you wear on vacation. I had bought a cheap straw hat and left it on the table behind me, just visible in the frame of the video call. It was a prop, a cliché. But people like Rachel run on clichés. They don't see real people, they only see stereotypes. To her, I was just an obstacle, and now I was an obstacle on vacation. I dialed her number for a video call. After 3 rings, her face appeared on the screen. She was in her car. I could see the headrest behind her. She was wearing sunglasses, which she pushed to the top of her head when she saw who it was. She looked annoyed. She always looked annoyed when I called, as if my existence was an interruption to her very important life spent spending money she didn't have. "Hi, Gideon," she said, her voice tight. "What's up? We're kind of busy." I pitched my voice a little higher, adding a slight tremor. I hesitated before speaking, mimicking the cognitive delay she was so eager to diagnose me with. "Rachel," I said, "I just wanted to let you know I'm at the airport. My flight leaves in an hour." Her expression shifted instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory alertness. She pulled the car over, and I watched the background stop moving. She wanted to give this news her full attention. "You're at the airport?" she asked. "You're actually leaving?" "Yes," I said, letting out a long, weary sigh. "You and Travis were right. I need a break. The city is too cold. It gets into my bones. I booked a place in Boca Raton, a nice facility, an assisted living community, just for a month to try it out. They have doctors there, people to watch over me." I watched the corner of her mouth twitch. She was trying not to smile, trying to control the urge to scream with delight. This was her victory. She had successfully bullied the old man out of his fortress. "That's wonderful, Gideon," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. It's really for the best. You're going to love the warm weather and you'll make new friends. Don't worry about a thing back here. We'll keep an eye on the apartment. No, I said quickly, injecting a note of panic into my voice. No, stay away from the apartment. Why not? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Suspicion. She was naturally suspicious because she was naturally dishonest. I left it a mess, I stammered. I didn't do the dishes and I didn't make the bed. I don't want you seeing it like that. It's embarrassing. Just leave it be. I threw the deadbolt and locked the chains. Nobody can get in. Rachel smiled, a soothing, patronizing expression. Gideon, we're family. We don't care about a few unwashed plates. We just want to make sure the pipes don't freeze. We'll just pop in to check on things. I let out an agitated breath, rubbing my forehead and covering my eyes for a moment, as if overwhelmed. It's more than just the dishes, Rachel, I whispered. I leaned closer to the phone camera, dropping my volume, forcing her to lean in on her end to listen. What is it? She asked. It's the safe, I said. The air in her car seemed to freeze. I had said the magic word. The safe. The holy grail of their greed. What about the safe? She asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. Her eyes were locked onto mine. I think I forgot to lock it, I said. I was looking for some documents this morning. The insurance policies, the bonds, the deed to the place. I wanted to organize things before I left. My mind has been so foggy lately. I can't remember if I spun the dial. I watched her pupils dilate. I was feeding her the exact narrative she had constructed. I was the old fool who left his fortune unsecured. The deed is in the safe? She asked. And the bonds, yes, I said. The bearer bonds from the 80s. And the cash? I kept an emergency fund in there, about $50,000. I don't trust the banks anymore. You know how it is. $50,000 in cash. Bearer bonds. The deed. I had just laid out an untraceable buffet of wealth. I saw the motion of her throat as she swallowed. She was doing the math. She was calculating how fast she could get to the Gold Coast. Gideon, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed excitement, you can't leave the safe unlocked. That's dangerous. If someone breaks in... I know, I said, sounding close to tears. I'm worried, but I'm already at the gate. I can't turn back. I'll miss my flight. I need you to promise me you won't go in there. I don't want you to see how much money I've hoarded. It's indecent. I promise, she lied. It was breathtaking how easily the lie slipped past her lips. We won't touch a thing. You just go to Florida, relax, and have a margarita. We'll handle everything here. I let out a massive sigh of relief. Thank you, Rachel. You're a good girl. Tell Travis I love him. Tell him the combination is his birthday. Just in case anything happens to me. I watched her freeze. The combination was his birthday. I had just handed over the keys to the kingdom. Or so she thought. In reality, the combination was nowhere near his birthday. It was the date I caught my first embezzler. But she didn't know that. She would try his birthday. She would try her birthday. She would try their anniversary. She would spend hours standing in front of that safe, spinning the dial, sweating and panicking, while the silent alarm counted down the seconds to her arrest. Okay, Dad, she said. She called me Dad. She only ever called me Dad when she thought she was getting money. Have a safe flight. Call us when you land. I will, I said. Goodbye. I ended the call. I leaned back in my chair. The performance was over. I felt a wave of exhaustion, but it was a satisfying, pleasant weariness, the feeling an artisan gets right after sliding the final stone into an arch. It was perfectly secure. I picked up my iPad and switched the view to the hidden camera in the living room across the street. The apartment was dead quiet. Dust was still floating through the afternoon sunbeams. The oil painting of the ship on the wall looked completely innocent. Tucked behind it was the safe, filled with old tax returns and costume jewelry. Some might call it a cruel trick. Someone might call it entrapment. But entrapment requires inducing someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. I didn't induce her. I simply removed the consequences she believed existed. I showed her an open door and her own character drove her to walk through it. I stared at the screen, wondering how long it would take. She was in her car. By now, she was likely calling Travis. He's gone, she would say. He's at the airport. He left the safe wide open. There's cash. There are bonds. We have to go right now. Travis would hesitate. He always hesitated. Are you sure? He'd ask. I'm positive, she'd scream at him. He told me his mind is slipping, Travis. He admitted it. He even gave me the combination. This is it. This is how we pay off those guys. This is how we save the house. They wouldn't wait for darkness. They were too desperate. But they wouldn't come immediately either. To be safe, they'd wait for nightfall. They'd wait for the midnight shift change when the night doorman took over, because the night guy was lazy and never asked questions. I checked the time. 4 p.m. I had 8 hours. I stood up, stretched, and walked into the small kitchenette of the penthouse. I uncorked a bottle of red wine, one I had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight was that occasion. Tonight was the ultimate audit. I poured a glass and walked back to the window, looking at the building across the street. Silhouetted against the fading sky, it looked just like a tombstone. I thought about the man I used to be, the father who taught Travis how to play baseball, the husband who bought Catherine her mink coat. That man was gone. Over the past 5 years, he had been cut down by 1,000 small betrayals, dying slowly in a sea of lies. The man left behind was colder, harder. He was a man who believed in accountability. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Rachel. Have a safe flight. We love you. I stared at the words. We love you. It was the ultimate insult. They didn't love me. They loved what I could provide. They loved the idea of me passing away. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone. I didn't want any distractions. I sat down at the surveillance monitors, adjusted the brightness, and checked the audio feed. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the empty apartment. I could hear the distant traffic on the street below. The stage was set. The actors were rehearsing their lines, and the audience of one was waiting. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex with a finish that tasted like oak and iron. Come on, Rachel, I whispered to the screen. Don't let me down. Be the exact person I know you are. The sun set, and the city lights flickered to life. The apartment across the street became a dark box full of shadows. 7 p.m., nothing happened. 9 p.m., nothing happened. At 11 p.m., I saw a car pull up to the curb on the street below. I lifted my binoculars. It was a black SUV, Travis's car. They sat inside for a long time. I could see the glow of phone screens illuminating their faces. They were probably arguing, planning, or hesitating. Finally, the doors opened. 2 figures stepped out, dressed in dark clothing. They were carrying a large duffel bag, the kind of bag you bring when you intend to haul away heavy objects, like silverware or coats, or a heavy metal box full of cash. Shi tong yi she fang, jing yin mo shi. They headed toward the entrance of my building. They didn't take the main entrance. They walked around the side to use the service door. They still had that key. My heart rate remained steady. My hands were dry. I watched them disappear into the building. I lowered my binoculars and looked at the iPad. A moment later, a notification popped up on the screen. Motion detected in service corridor. They were in. I leaned forward and took another sip of wine. Welcome home, kids, I said. The sensors in the hallway lit up. They were moving toward the apartment door. I switched the camera angle to the living room. The door handle jiggled. The lock turned. The door was pushed wide open. Rachel stepped in first. She didn't look for a light switch. She had a flashlight in her hand. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty room. She froze. Travis followed her inside, closing the door and throwing the deadbolt. I watched them. They were standing in the foyer of the home where Travis grew up, but they didn't look like family at all. They looked like intruders. Rachel shone the light on the wall where the painting hung, the ship at sea. There it is, she whispered. The microphone caught her voice perfectly. She aimed the beam at the artwork. Take it down, she told Travis. Travis stepped forward, reaching out for the painting. I checked the alarm status on my phone. System armed, silent mode. The countdown had already begun. I watched my son reach for the frame hiding the empty safe, feeling a deep, terrible sorrow. But I didn't press the disarm button. I let him touch the frame. And then I waited for the police. The digital clock on the microwave in my new kitchenette blinked a harsh green. 2 o'clock, 2 in the morning, the witching hour for the desperate and the damned. I sat in the dark of the penthouse, the leather chair cool against my back, with a glass of Pinot Noir breathing on the side table. I wasn't drinking it anymore. I just watched the liquid settle, much like the fate of my family across the street. I lifted the binoculars, though I barely needed them. The feed on the massive monitor in front of me was streaming in high-definition night vision. The living room of my old apartment was bathed in a ghostly green-tinted light. To anyone passing by on the street, the 12th floor windows looked dark, the curtains pulled tight, but inside was a hive of criminal activity. Rachel and Travis had been inside for 10 minutes. They hadn't come alone. That was the variable that turned a family dispute into a felony conspiracy. Following behind them like a shadow was a man I didn't recognize. He was short, stocky, wore a utility vest, and carried a heavy canvas bag that made a metallic clinking sound when he set it down on my hardwood floor. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't a mover. He was a professional safecracker. On the screen, I watched Rachel direct him toward the wall, safe hidden behind the oil painting. Travis had already taken the painting down, leaning it against the sofa, where it sat discarded like garbage. My son stood in the center of the room, rubbing his hands together, his head jerking toward the front door every few seconds. He was terrified. Good. Fear is the only rational response to committing a crime, so at least he had enough sense to be afraid. Rachel, however, was fearless. She paced in front of the safe, gesturing wildly at the man with the tools. I turned up the audio. The directional microphone behind the radiator picked up her voice with crystal clarity. "How long is this going to take?" she hissed, her voice sharp through the static. "You said 5 minutes, and it's already been 10. We don't have all night." The safecracker didn't look up. He was pressing a magnetic drill assembly against the face of my vintage wall safe, working with a slow, methodical rhythm that clearly infuriated her. "Lady, do you want this open, or do you want it shredded?" the man grunted. "This is a solid mechanical lock, old-school manganese plate. If I trigger the glass relocker, this thing is sealed forever, and you'll need a plasma cutter to get in. Do you want to wake up the whole building with a torch, or do you want me to use some skill?" Rachel crossed her arms. "Just get it done." The old man said the combination was a birthday, but the dial felt tight. He probably ruined it with his shaking hands. "Just drill it." I took a sip of my wine. She had tried the birthday. I knew she would. She had likely spent the first 5 minutes turning that dial to Travis's birthday, then hers, then their anniversary. When it didn't open, she didn't stop. She didn't think, maybe Gideon isn't confused. She thought, Gideon broke the lock. Her arrogance was the blindfold over her eyes. Travis stepped into the frame. Even in the green night vision, he looked pale. "Rachel," he whispered, "we shouldn't be drilling. It's too loud. What if the neighbor's here? What if the doorman comes up?" "The doorman is asleep," Rachel snapped. "I gave him $50 last week. He won't move an inch unless the building is on fire. As for the neighbors, they're all deaf and old. Stop being so weak, Travis. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want those guys to break your legs? Because this is our only way out. We need what's in that box." I leaned forward in my chair. Those guys. So that confirmed it. Travis didn't just owe money to a bank, he owed money to loan sharks. That explained the physical terror. That explained why a schoolteacher was standing in his father's living room at 2 in the morning, watching a criminal drill a safe. He was backed into a corner. I felt a pang of pity, brief and sharp. I had failed him. I had overprotected him, and doing so had left him soft, easy prey for predators. Rachel was a predator. The loan sharks were predators. Travis was just meat. But the pity vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold resolve of an auditor. He had made his choice. He chose the drill over the truth. I looked at the alarm status on my phone screen. Silent alarm. Active. Zone 2. Living room. Status. Confirmed intrusion. Timer. Expired. The signal was out. The police dispatch computer had already received the Tier 1 priority alert. Silent panic alarm. 12th floor. Multiple sensors tripped. Audio monitoring indicating drilling tools. Suspects on site. Because I registered the system as an occupied vulnerable resident, The dispatcher wouldn't call to verify a false alarm. They would just send the cars. They would treat this as a hostage situation or a home invasion with a resident trapped inside. I checked the time. 2:12 a.m. In the Gold Coast, response times for a priority, one alert are usually under 6 minutes. They were already on their way. On the screen, the drill whined, a low, grating screech. The safecracker applied pressure, the metal screaming under the friction. "All right," the man said. "I'm through the hard plate. Now I just need to scope the tumbler." He slid a fiber optic scope into the hole he had bored, pressed his eye to the eyepiece, and began turning the dial slowly, watching the internal gates align. Rachel was practically vibrating with greed, standing right over his shoulder. "Do you see it? Is it full? Is the cash in there?" "I can't see inside the box yet, lady," the man said. "I'm just unlocking the door. Back off. You're breathing down my neck." Travis walked to the window, the exact window facing where I sat. He peeked through the slit in the curtains, looking straight out at me, though he couldn't see me. He stared at the dark windows of Sovereign Tower, looking completely on edge, like a condemned man waiting for the executioner. He didn't know his executioner was his own father. I lowered my binoculars, picked up my phone, and opened a police scanner app. I wanted to hear the coordination. "Dispatch to all units. 1400, Lakeshore Drive. 10-21 in progress. Silent robbery alarm. Multiple sensors tripped. Audio monitoring indicates drilling tools. Suspects on scene. Units 4, Alpha, and 4 Bravo responding. ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I looked at the screen. The safecracker smiled. "Gotcha," he muttered. He gave the dial one final turn, and a heavy mechanical click echoed through the microphone. The handle gave way. Rachel gasped. "Open it!" she shrieked, forgetting to lower her voice. The man pulled the heavy steel door open. The interior of the safe was dark. Rachel shoved the man aside, shining her flashlight into the cavity. "It's deep," she said, her voice shaking. "It's huge." She reached her hand inside and pulled out the stack of documents I had left, the old tax returns from 1995. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through them frantically. "Tax papers? Where are the bonds?" "Gideon said there were bonds. Keep looking," Travis called out from the window, running over. "Check the back." Rachel threw the papers onto the floor and reached in again, pulling out the small metal cash box I had placed inside. It rattled. "This is it," she said. "This has to be it. The cash, the jewelry." She set the box on the coffee table. It was secured by a simple latch. She didn't wait for the locksmith. She grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, one of the few items I had left behind, and slammed it down on the latch, breaking it open. The lid popped up. Rachel reached inside and pulled out a handful of what looked like diamonds and rubies, sparkling under the flashlight beam. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Look at this, Travis. Look at the size of these. This is millions. This is absolute millions." She held up a necklace made of paste glass and rhinestones. It was a prop Catherine had worn when she played a duchess in a community theater production of The Importance of Being Earnest. It was worth about $15 at a thrift store. Travis stared at it, fascinated. "We're saved," he whispered. "We're actually saved." I watched them celebrate. I watched them hug. I watched Rachel stuff the fake jewelry into her pockets, letting out a manic, high-pitched laugh. They were so blinded by their victory, so drunk on the illusion of wealth, that they didn't hear what I heard. They didn't hear the sirens cut off as the cruisers approached the building, keeping the element of surprise. They didn't hear the heavy thud of boots hitting the marble floor in the lobby 12 stories below. They didn't hear the elevator start its ascent. But the safecracker did. He stopped packing up his drill, tilting his head. "Quiet," he said. Rachel ignored him, digging into the safe again, looking for the deed. "I said quiet," the man barked. The room went dead silent. Then over the audio feed, I heard it. The heavy metallic clunk of the service elevator arriving on the 12th floor. A soft chime followed. Travis's eyes went wide. "What was that?" he whispered. The safecracker didn't answer. He grabbed his bag and ran toward the kitchen, looking for a back exit. But there was no back exit. I lived on the 12th floor. The fire escape was on the outside, and the windows were painted shut. I had checked them myself. Rachel froze. the fake diamonds still in her hand. The front door exploded. It wasn't a knock, it was a battering ram. The smart lock I had installed shattered under the force of the police breaching tool. The door flew open, slamming against the wall with enough violence to shake the camera. "Police, get down! Get on the ground, now!" The room was instantly flooded with blinding tactical lights. 4 heavily armed officers swarmed into the living room, rifles raised. Travis shrieked, dropping to his knees with his hands in the air. The safecracker dove behind the sofa, but an officer was on him a second later, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him out. Rachel just stood there, clutching the costume jewelry to her chest, blinking into the lights like a deer caught in the high beams of a semi-truck. "Drop it!" the lead officer shouted. "Drop the weapon!" He thought the heavy candlestick she was still holding was a weapon. Rachel dropped it, and it clattered against the floor. She let go of the jewelry too, and it scattered across the hardwood like confetti. "I live here!" she screamed, her voice turning high and reedy with terror. "I live here. This is my father-in-law's apartment. I have a key. Get on the ground." The officer didn't care about her family tree. He cared about securing the scene. He kicked her legs out from under her, sending her crashing down. She hit the floor hard, and he pinned his knee into her back, pulling her hands behind her to snap the cuffs on. "I have a key," she sobbed into the rug. Call Gideon Cross. He'll tell you." I took a sip of my wine in the penthouse, watching my daughter-in-law get handcuffed in the wreckage of my living room. I watched my son get pushed against the wall, frisked for weapons. I watched the safecracker get let out in irons. The lead officer keyed his mic. "Dispatch. We have the scene secure. 3 suspects detained inside. 1 male white, 35. 1 female white, 32. 1 unidentified male, late 40s. We caught them drilling a safe. Looks like a professional burglary interrupted. No sign of the resident." The radio crackled back. "Copy that. We are contacting the owner on record to verify occupancy status. Stand by." My phone rang. It wasn't Rachel, and it wasn't Travis. It was the Chicago Police Department. I looked at the caller ID, took a deep breath, and cleared my throat. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Hello?" I said. My voice was level, the tone of a man waking up in a warm bed in Florida, confused by a late-night call. "Mr. Cross," the dispatcher asked, "this is Sergeant Miller with the Chicago Police Department. There's been an incident at your residence on Lakeshore Drive. Are you currently at home?" "No," I said. "I'm in Boca Raton. I just arrived tonight." "Why? What's wrong? Is the building on fire?" "No, sir," the sergeant said. "But your silent alarm was triggered. Our officers responded and detained 3 individuals inside your apartment. A male and a female claiming to be your son and daughter-in-law, and a 3rd male with burglary tools." I let out a gasp, a perfectly timed, shocked intake of air. "My son?" I asked. "That's impossible. My son knows I'm away. He knows he isn't allowed in that apartment. I took his key away months ago. He has no reason to be there. And a 3rd man? I don't know any 3rd man." The sergeant paused. "Sir, the female suspect is screaming that she has permission. She says you told her to come over." "She's lying," I said firmly, my voice hardening. "Sergeant, listen to me carefully. I've been having issues with them. They've been very aggressive, trying to get money from me. If they are there, and they brought a man with tools, oh my God, are they trying to break into my safe?" "Yes, sir," the sergeant said. "The safe has been drilled open." "I want to press charges," I said, my voice turning ice cold. "I want them arrested. That is my home. Those are my things. I didn't authorize anyone to be there. If they broke in, they are criminals. Treat them like criminals." "Understood, Mr. Cross," the sergeant said. "We'll transport them to the precinct. We'll need you to come in and make a formal statement when you get back." "I'll catch the first flight back in the morning," I said. "Keep them locked up, Sergeant. I don't feel safe knowing they're out there." "We'll handle it, sir." The line went dead. I looked back at the surveillance screen. The police were hauling them out. Rachel was still screaming my name, and Travis was crying, his head hanging low. I finished my wine and shut off the iPad. My watch was finally over. The audit was complete. The discrepancies had been exposed, and the liabilities were secure. I stood up and walked toward the bedroom of my penthouse, ready for a peaceful night's sleep. In the morning, I had a flight to catch. Not back from Florida, but from the decoy I created. straight into reality. I had to head to the police station and play the part of the heartbroken father. And believe me, I was going to earn an Oscar for it. The short-lived celebration across the street hadn't ended with a whimper. It was cut short by a sound like thunder. From my bird's-eye view in the penthouse, I watched the heavy oak door of Unit 12B splinter inward. It was a beautiful, violent dismantling of their privacy. The smart lock, a piece of high-tech gear custom-made to look like antique brass, held for only a microsecond before the tactical breach team's battering ram turned the doorframe into kindling. The noise inside that room must have been deafening, a bone-rattling shockwave. But from my silent vantage point behind the double-paned glass of Sovereign Tower, it was like watching a controlled explosion in a silent movie. The impact on the 3 people inside was instant and total. Travis, who had been holding a strand of glass pearls up to the flashlight, let them slip from his fingers. It wasn't just his hands that gave out. His entire body seemed to lose its structural integrity. He collapsed, his knees slamming hard against the hardwood floor with enough force to leave severe bruises. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just curled up like a bug exposed to a sudden, blinding light. It was the reaction of a man who had been waiting for the hammer to fall his entire life, and on some sick level, he looked relieved that the waiting was finally over. The safecracker in the utility vest was the only one with actual survival instincts. The moment the frame split, before the wood even hit the floor, he was in motion. He dove behind the heavy leather sofa, scrambling for cover with his hands already up to protect his head. He knew what was coming. He knew that when a door explodes like that, the people rushing in aren't there to ask questions. They are there to eliminate a threat. He made himself as small as possible, surrendering before the first tactical boot even crossed the threshold. But Rachel was a living masterclass in frozen arrogance. She didn't drop to the floor and she didn't raise her hands. She stood dead center in the room, clutching the metal cash box to her chest like a shield, staring blankly at the massive hole where the door used to be. She was instantly blinded by the tactical lights attached to the team's rifles. 4 beams of high-intensity white light cut through the darkness, pinning her in place. They turned her into a ghost, a pale figure caught in the harsh glare of reality. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing. Her brain simply couldn't process the instant transition from victorious heiress to prime suspect. "Down! On the ground! Now!" The command blasted through the iPad audio, distorted by the sheer volume, but absolute in its authority. "Police! Get down on the ground!" The lead officer, a massive figure in heavy body armor, swarmed into the room with practiced, overwhelming speed. He bypassed Travis, who was already sobbing into the rug. He bypassed the sofa. He went straight for the only person still standing. He went straight for Rachel. "Drop the box. Show me your hands." Rachel didn't drop the box. She clutched it tighter. In her delusional mind, that box was her salvation. It was the money for the loan sharks, the down payment on her new life. Dropping it meant admitting total defeat. "I live here!" she screamed. The directional microphone peaked, the audio clipping from the sheer volume of her hysteria. "I live here! You can't do this! This is my father-in-law's house!" The officer didn't care about her family tree. He cared about the metallic object in her hands that in the dark and chaos could easily be mistaken for a weapon. He didn't argue, and he didn't ask for identification. He closed the distance in 2 strides. With a fluid, practiced sweep of his leg, he took her feet right out from under her. Rachel slammed hard onto the floor. The cash box flew from her grip, skidding across the polished wood and scattering the worthless costume jewelry in a sparkling arc. The officer was on her back instantly, driving his knee into her spine and pinning her down. He grabbed her right wrist, wrenching it behind her back, followed by the left. The sharp, mechanical clicking of the handcuffs, snapping tight, marked the exact end of her freedom. "You're hurting me!" Rachel shrieked into the floor. Her face was pressed flat against the wood, her dignity entirely gone. "Get off of me! Do you know who I am? I'm Rachel Cross. I have a key. Call Gideon. Call him right now." The officer ignored her, shouting codes over his shoulder mic to clear the room. "Left clear! Right clear! Suspect 1 secured. 2 other officers swarmed Travis. They didn't even need to force him down. He was already flat on his stomach, hands laced behind his head, weeping loudly. "Don't shoot," he wailed, his voice cracking with tears. "Please don't shoot. I didn't do anything. I just wanted the documents. Please." They cuffed him anyway, pulling him up by his armpits and shoving him against the wall for a rough, efficient pat-down. An officer pulled Travis's wallet from his pocket and tossed it onto the floor, followed by his phone and the keys, my keys, the ones he had used to unlock the service entrance. They landed with a heavy clatter, right next to the fake diamonds. The 4th officer dragged the safecracker out from behind the couch. The man was entirely compliant. He knew the drill. He walked with his head down, hands already behind his back, waiting for the steel bracelets. He looked bored, like a man already calculating his bail. He glided past Rachel, who was still struggling on the floor, and shook his head. "Shut up, lady," the safecracker muttered. "You're only making it worse." "I am not a criminal," Rachel yelled, twisting her neck to glare at the officer pinning her. "I have permission. The owner is my father-in-law. He's confused. He forgot to tell you. Check the records. Check the owner logs." "Ma'am, stop resisting," the officer snapped, hauling her to her knees and then to her feet. She was a mess. Her expensive coat was covered in dust from my floor. Her hair was wild and her eyes were frantic. "Look at this," she screamed, nodding toward the scattered jewelry. "These are family heirlooms. You broke them." The officer glanced down at the pile of glass and plastic. He used his boot to kick a rhinestone necklace out of his path, watching it slide weightlessly across the floor. He knew cheap junk when he saw it. He looked back at Rachel with pure professional disdain. "You're under arrest for burglary, safe burglary, and possession of burglary tools," the officer recited. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." "I will absolutely not remain silent," Rachel spat. "This is a misunderstanding. My father-in-law is in Florida. He told us to come here. He told us to open the safe." The officer marched her toward the door, where the shattered wood frame stood as physical proof of their crime. Moving out, I watched the progression from my tower, taking a slow sip of my wine. The taste was complex, layered with dark fruit and vindication. I watched my son get marched out of the home he grew up in. He looked small, broken, and hollowed out. He took one last look at the empty wall safe, the black hole where he thought his salvation was hiding. There was no money. There were no bonds. There was only a hole in the wall and steel around his wrists. The procession moved into the hallway, and the camera angles flipped. I switched to the corridor feed. I watched the neighbors peeking out. Mrs. Gable from 12A was in her silk robe, clutching her poodle. Mr. Henderson from 12C was staring with wide eyes. Rachel saw them. She saw her audience. "Tell them," she screamed at Mrs. Gable. "Tell them who I am. You see me here all the time. Tell them I'm the daughter-in-law." Mrs. Gable looked at the police. She looked at the smashed door. She looked at the handcuffs. Then she looked at Rachel and slowly closed her door, the click of the lock cutting through the noise in the hallway. It was a social death sentence. In the Gold Coast you can be eccentric and you can be rude, but you absolutely cannot be the subject of a police raid. Rachel was officially social poison. The police marched them into the elevator. I flipped to the lobby cameras. The doorman Rachel had bribed was standing by the desk, looking absolutely terrified. The police had likely woken him up with a badge in his face to get elevator access. He wasn't about to vouch for her. He was trying to save his job. I watched them get led out of the building. The blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the limestone facade, painting the street in a chaotic rhythm. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, late-night dog walkers and drivers slowing down to gawk. Rachel was loaded into the back of a cruiser, forced to duck her head to avoid hitting the roof. It was an incredibly undignified end to her social climbing aspirations. Travis was taken to a separate car. He slumped against the window, his forehead pressed flat against the glass, completely defeated. The safecracker climbed into a third car, looking like he had just called a cab to go to work. The sergeant remained on the sidewalk, talking to the doorman and taking notes. He pointed up toward my windows, and the doorman nodded vigorously. My phone rang again. It was the sergeant. "Mr. Cross," he said, "we've cleared the suspects from the scene. The unit is secure. We found extensive damage to the entryway and the interior wall safe. It looks like they used an industrial drill. Did they manage to take anything?" I kept my voice trembling, playing the part of the shocked old man. "Oh dear. There was a metal box. It was unlocked. There was a lot of jewelry scattered on the floor. It looked valuable. We're bagging it for evidence." I let out a sigh. Oh goodness. My wife's theater props. She loved those pieces. They aren't worth $5, Sergeant, but the sentimental value is immense. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard a faint, stifled chuckle. "I see," the sergeant said. "Well, the female suspect seemed very convinced they were real. She's being quite vocal about it." "I'm sure she is," I said. "She always had a vivid imagination. I keep my actual valuables in a bank vault, Sergeant. I'm not foolish enough to leave diamonds in a wall safe." "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign the formal complaints," the sergeant said, "and we'll need an inventory of any physical damage." "I'll be there first thing," I promised. "Thank you, Sergeant. Thank you for protecting my home." "It's what we do, sir. Try to get some sleep." I hung up and looked down at the street. The cruisers were pulling away, their sirens silent, but their lights still cutting through the Chicago night. They were taking my family to a holding cell. They were taking them to a place with no luxury, no pretension, and no escape. I turned away from the window, walked back to the kitchenette, and rinsed my wine glass. I dried it carefully and placed it back in the cupboard. The raid was over. The physical threat had been eliminated, but the audit wasn't finished. Next came the paperwork phase, the legal dismantling. Next would be the cold, harsh light of a courtroom. I walked to the bedroom of the penthouse and sat on the edge of the bed. I felt a deep ache in my bones. It wasn't physical fatigue. It was the weight of the tragedy. I had just orchestrated the arrest of my own son. I had just sent him to jail. A weaker man might cry. A weaker man might call the precinct and drop the charges. But I am not a weaker man. I am a man who understands that actions have consequences. I knew that if I saved him now, I would only be teaching him that he could steal from me without penalty. I would be teaching him that my love was a weakness to be exploited. I lay back on the pillows and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I'd put on my suit. I'd walk into that police station. I'd look at their faces through the glass of an interrogation room and deliver the final, crushing blow. I'd tell them the truth about the apartment. I'd tell them they hadn't just broken into a father's home. They had broken into a corporate asset, and corporations don't have feelings. Corporations don't do mercy. I closed my eyes and slept with the peace of an honest man, the peace of an auditor who balances the books no matter how much red ink it takes. Just as the last police cruiser pulled away from the curb 12 stories below, my phone rang for the second time. The red and blue lights were still dancing across the limestone exterior of the building, a silent disco of consequences. I let it ring 3 times. A man who has been woken from a deep sleep, twice in an hour in Florida, should be slow, groggy, and alarmed. I picked up, clearing my throat, pitching my voice into a register of trembling anxiety I hadn't felt in 40 years. "Hello?" I said. "Sergeant, is that you?" It wasn't the sergeant this time. It was a detective. His voice was coarser, thick with the cynicism of a man who had seen too many domestic disputes turn into crime scenes. "Mr. Cross, this is Detective Kowalski. I've taken over the scene here. Before we transport these individuals to central booking, I need to verify a few details. They're making a significant amount of noise in the back of my car, sir." I walked to the penthouse window and looked down. I could see the silhouette of the detective on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear. "What kind of noise?" I asked. "The female suspect, identified as Rachel Cross, is insisting she had a standing invitation. She claims you gave her the combination to the safe over the phone this afternoon. She says it's a misunderstanding. She claims she came over to check the plumbing." I let out a long, shaky breath. It was a masterpiece of vocal acting. "Detective," I said, my voice cracking, "I am 72 years old. I was a forensic auditor for 40 years. I do not give safe combinations out over the phone, and I do not invite people to my home at 2 in the morning with industrial drilling equipment. the detective grunted. Figured as much. But Mr. Cross, she has a key that fits the lock perfectly, or what's left of it. It's a stolen key, I said. The lie tasted sweet because, on a moral level, it was the absolute truth. She had stolen my peace, stolen my trust, and that piece of brass was merely a token of her theft. I asked her to return that key months ago. She refused, telling me she had lost it. If she used it tonight, she used the stolen tool to facilitate a felony. I heard the scratch of a pen against paper. The detective was logging it. Stolen key. Good, that adds a layer of premeditation. What about the male suspect? The detective continued. Travis Cross. He claims to be your son. Says he's a school teacher. He's weeping heavily, sir. Says he was just looking for papers. I closed my eyes. I pictured Travis, the boy who used to come to me with his report cards, his hands shaking, terrified that a B- would disappoint me. He never understood that I didn't care about the grade. I cared about the effort, and tonight his effort was a crime. Mr. Cross, the detective pressed, is he your son? I looked across the street at the empty apartment, at the hole in the wall where the safe used to be. Detective, listen to me carefully. Biologically, that man might share my DNA. But a man who breaks into an elderly person's residence in the middle of the night, brings a safecracker to drill through walls, and terrorizes a neighborhood. That man is a stranger to me. I do not have a son who behaves this way. I do not have any family authorized to be in my home at 2 a.m. People who enter a domicile at that hour with those tools are predators. Silence fell over the line. The detective was absorbing the icy finality of the statement. He realized there would be no family reunions at the precinct, no drop charges. Understood, sir, the detective finally said. His tone had shifted, becoming far more respectful. And the third man, the one with the drill? I've never heard of him, I said. But detective, if they brought a professional with heavy equipment, they weren't checking the plumbing. They were there to clean me out. They thought I was gone. They thought I was defenseless. No doubt about it, the detective agreed. All right, Mr. Cross, you can rest easy. They aren't cleaning out anything tonight, except the bologna sandwiches in the holding cell. We're charging them with home invasion, burglary, possession of burglary tools, and criminal damage to property. Home invasion, I repeated. That sounds severe. In Illinois, it's a Class X felony, sir, the detective said. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 6 years if convicted, especially since they triggered a priority alert indicating the residence was occupied. Technically, by entering a locked residence with the intent to commit a theft, they crossed a very serious line. 6 years. The number hung in the air. 6 years is a long time. Long enough to miss a lot of birthdays. Long enough to lose a teaching license. Long enough to end a marriage. Do you want to speak with them? The detective asked. I can patch the phone through, maybe hearing your voice. No, I snapped. It was an instinctive refusal. I didn't want to hear their pleading, didn't want to hear Rachel's shrill excuses, didn't want to hear Travis cry. If I listened, I might remember the good years, the Christmas mornings. And I couldn't afford to remember. I needed to remain the auditor. I have nothing to say to them, detective. Whatever they have to say, they can say to a judge. I'll see them in court. Copy that. We'll need a formal written statement once you return from Florida. I'll book a flight back tomorrow morning, I said. Good night, detective. Good night, Mr. Cross. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline fading. It was done. The verbal contract had been sealed. I had just disowned my family to a police officer on a recorded line. I walked back to the window. The detective was getting into his car. The street was empty again. The show was over, and the lone audience member was left in the dark. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink. I didn't want it any more. I washed the glass, dried it, and put it away. Walking into the penthouse bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old. The lines around my eyes were deep, and my skin was pale, but my eyes were clear. It was the face of a man who had done what was necessary. They would call me cruel, call me heartless. Rachel would tell anyone who would listen that I set them up. And she'd be right. I did set them up. But I didn't force them through that door. I didn't force them to hire a criminal. I didn't force them to try and rob me. I simply gave them an opportunity to show who they truly were, and they did, with a drill and a flashlight at 2 in the morning. I walked to the bedroom, lay down on the stiff corporate mattress, and pulled the duvet up to my chin. Tomorrow would be a busy day. I had to see Cole, go to the police station, and face the wreckage of my living room. But for now, I was safe. My assets were safe. Catherine's urn was safely sitting on the mantelpiece in the other room. I do not have any family authorized to be in my home, I whispered to the empty room. It was a fact, and facts, as I had spent a lifetime learning through numbers, are the only things that set you free. The coffee at the 18th precinct tasted like burnt rubber and bureaucracy. I held the styrofoam cup in my hands, not to drink, but to warm my fingers. The precinct's air conditioning was cranked up high, a temperature clearly designed to keep people awake and uncomfortable. It was working. I sat in interrogation room B, with Cole beside me. He wore a navy chalk-striped suit that cost more than the detective's car, and a leather briefcase sat on the metal table in front of him. He looked like a shark swimming in a goldfish bowl, calm, collected, and ready to strike. Sitting across the metal table were Rachel and Travis. They looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Rachel's hair was matted, and expensive mascara had smeared down her cheeks in dark trails, making her look like a frantic raccoon. Her coat, the one she had been parading around in just 24 hours ago, was wrinkled and stained with dust from my floor. Travis was worse. He slumped in his chair, his eyes red and swollen, his hands shaking inside the handcuffs that locked him to the table. Detective Kowalski stood by the door, arms crossed, looking exhausted, like a man who just wanted to get through the paperwork. When Rachel looked at me, she didn't look down in shame. She lunged forward, the chains rattling against the steel table. "Gideon!" she shrieked. "Thank God! Tell them! Tell this idiot detective it's a mistake! Tell them you forgot! Tell them we have the key!" I looked at her. I didn't blink, and I didn't flinch. I stared at her with the same professional detachment I used to look at CEOs who cooked the books. "There is no mistake, Rachel," I said, my voice low, steady, and entirely devoid of warmth. "What?" she gasped. "What are you talking about? You gave us permission. You called me. You said the safe was open." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "I said I was going to Florida," I corrected. "I said I was leaving the apartment empty. I did not say you could show up at 2 in the morning with a safecracker named Torch Mick." "That wasn't... We lost the key?" Rachel stammered. "We needed to check the plumbing. We thought there was a leak." "A leak inside a wall safe?" I countered. "That is a remarkably specific plumbing issue." Travis let out a choked sob. "Dad, please. We're in real trouble. Felony trouble. They're talking jail time. Please drop the charges. We learned our lesson." I looked at my son, the man who forged my signature at a bank. "You haven't learned a thing, Travis," I said, "but you're about to." I nodded to Cole, who opened his briefcase and pulled out a binder. It was a thick 3-inch ledger. He dropped it onto the table with a heavy, hollow thud that echoed in the small room. "What is that?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "This is an audit report," I said. I flipped open the first tabbed page of the binder. "Let's start with the access logs," I said. "You claim you were checking on me. You claim you're a caring daughter-in-law." I read from the first page. October 12th, 2:30 p.m. Unauthorized entry. Target discovered wearing Catherine Cross's vintage mink coat. Target claimed to be decluttering. Target refused to return the key. I flipped the page. November 3rd, 10 a.m. Unauthorized entry while occupant was at a doctor's appointment. Target removed a silver picture frame from the mantelpiece. Item was not returned. I flipped it again. November 15th, 4 p.m. Unauthorized entry. Target went through desk drawers. Financial documents tampered with. I looked up. Rachel's face had drained of all color. "I have logged 36 separate unauthorized entries over the past 5 months," I said. "I have the dates, and I have the times. And as of last week, I have video." Cole pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen, and spun it around to face them. The video played, the footage from the hidden camera showing Rachel and the architect standing in my living room. The audio was crystal clear. "He's checked out. It's sad, really. His mind is like Swiss cheese. By the time we're done, he won't even remember he ever lived here." The words echoed in the interrogation room. Rachel stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. She was watching herself sentence me to an asylum, watching herself plan the destruction of my life. That's out of context," she screamed. "I was stressed. I didn't mean it like that." "What about this, then?" I asked. Cole slid the screen, playing the next video. It was the footage from last night, the drilling, the greed, and the exact moment she smashed open the cash box with the candlestick. "Look at this, Travis. Look at the size of these. This is millions. This is absolute millions." Dead silence filled the room. Travis buried his head on the table, sobbing quietly. Rachel looked up at the detective. "He recorded us. That's illegal. That's an invasion of privacy." "It's his own apartment, lady," Detective Kowalski said, his voice thick with disgust. "He can record whatever he wants, especially when you break his door down." I closed the binder. "I'm not losing my mind, Rachel," I said, "and I'm not confused. I'm a forensic auditor. I built my entire career on documenting fraud, and you two are the most reckless, sloppy amateurs I have ever encountered." "But we're family," Rachel cried out, her eyes wild with panic. "You set us up. You trapped us. You wanted us to go there." "I gave you a test," I replied. "A simple test of morality. All you had to do was nothing. All you had to do was respect my home and my absence. If you had stayed in your own house last night, we wouldn't be sitting here today. But you couldn't do it. You were too hungry." For the first time, Cole spoke. His voice was smooth, cool, and sharp as polished steel. "Mr. Cross will be pressing full charges," he announced. "We will be submitting this binder as evidence of harassment, financial elder abuse, and a predatory pattern of behavior. We will also be presenting a sworn affidavit from First National Bank, proving that Mr. Travis Cross attempted to breach a safe deposit box using a forged signature." Travis's head snapped up. "You knew about that?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I know everything, Travis. I know about the loan sharks. I know about the gambling. I know you tried to rob me while I was still drawing breath because you were too weak to face the consequences of your own mistakes." Travis stared at me, a mix of sheer terror and awe in his eyes. He had never seen me like this. He had only ever known me as his father. He had never seen the professional. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm so sorry." "I believe you," I said. "I believe you're sorry you got caught. But being sorry isn't the same thing as being innocent." I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. "I'm finished here, Detective," I said. "You have my statement. You have the evidence. Lock them up." "Wait!" Rachel screamed, lunging forward again until the chains jerked her back. "You can't just leave us here. We don't have bail money. We don't have a lawyer. You have to help us." I took one last look at her, the woman who wanted to reduce my walls to powder. "You wanted my assets, Rachel," I said. "You wanted the apartment, and you wanted the lifestyle. Well, now you get to live with the reality of that ambition." I turned my back and walked out. Walking down the hallway of the precinct, I could still hear Rachel screaming my name behind the heavy steel door. It sounded like a fading ghost. Cole walked in step with me. "That was incredibly cold, Gideon," he noted. "It was necessary," I replied. We stepped out into the crisp morning sun. The city was waking up. People were heading to work. The world was spinning, and I was free. But I still had one final card to play. One last turn of the knife to ensure they would never, ever try to come back. I paused on the precinct steps. "Cole," I said, "do they know about the sale yet?" "Not yet," Cole smiled. "Good," I said. "Let's go tell them who they actually robbed." The air in the detention center was stale and heavy, smelling of industrial cleaner and fear. Travis stood on the other side of the security glass, his fingers hooked into the heavy metal mesh. He looked completely hollowed out. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement completely vanished. All that was left was a terrified 35-year-old boy with nowhere left to run. "Dad," he whispered, his voice raspy and cracking under the weight of his panic. "You have to help me. You don't understand. It's not just the police." I stood perfectly straight, my hands folded behind my back. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen under a microscope. "What don't I understand, Travis?" I asked. He pressed closer to the glass, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for unseen microphones. "The money," he hissed. "The gambling. I didn't just lose my savings, Dad. I borrowed money from the wrong people. A loan shark out of Cicero. I owe him $80,000. He told me if I didn't have it by Friday, he'd put me in a wheelchair. He knows where I work. He knows where Rachel works." I listened to him, watching the beads of sweat break out across his forehead. So that was the catalyst. That was why he went along with Rachel's plan. He wasn't just greedy, he was being hunted. He tried to rob me not to get rich, but to survive the consequences of his own vices. Rachel, sitting on the metal bench behind him, looked up. Her face was a ruin of smudged makeup and despair. "Gideon, please," she begged, her voice thin and desperate. "Just bail us out. We'll sign whatever you want. We'll sign away the inheritance. We'll leave Chicago. Just get us out before the arraignment. If Travis goes to jail, those people will find him on the inside. They have a long reach." I looked over at Cole. My lawyer stood beside me in his immaculate dark suit, holding his leather briefcase like a weapon. He looked at me, waiting for the signal. I turned back to my son. "That sounds like an incredibly dangerous situation, Travis," I said. My voice was calm, completely untouched by the panic consuming him. "But it is a situation entirely of your own making. You gambled. You lost. And instead of coming to me like a man and asking for help, you decided to drill a hole in my wall. You decided to steal the safety net I spent 40 years building." "I was desperate," Travis cried out. "I thought you wouldn't notice. I thought if I just took the bonds, I could pay them off and replace them before you ever found out." "You thought I was losing my mind," I corrected him. "You thought I was an easy target." Travis gripped the wire mesh, his knuckles turning white. "Dad, please, I'm your son. They'll kill me." I nodded to Cole. It was time. Cole stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the small ledge beneath the window. The sharp click of the latches popping open sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. He pulled out just one document. It was a property deed transfer stamped by Cook County, dated 5 days ago. "There won't be any bail," Cole said, his voice smooth, professional, and entirely unyielding. "And Mr. Cross will not be intervening with any loan sharks. Furthermore, I'm afraid your legal situation is far more catastrophic than you realize." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, standing up, her handcuffed hands shaking. "It's just a burglary, right? It's a domestic dispute. We broke into a family home. The judge will be lenient. We don't have priors." Cole smiled. It was the grin of a shark smelling blood in the water. "You think you broke into Gideon Cross's apartment," Cole said. "You think you smashed your father's door and damaged your father's walls." "It is his apartment," Travis yelled, slamming his hand against the glass. "I grew up there. I have a right to be there." "It was my apartment," I said, using the past tense. I watched the words hit them. I watched the confusion ripple across their faces. "I sold it, Travis," I said. "I sold it last Tuesday. I sold it to BlackRock Residential Investment Group. They paid $2.1 million in cash. I signed a sale-leaseback agreement. I'm currently just a tenant. I pay rent to a corporation." Travis stepped back as if he had been slapped. You sold it?" "I liquidated the asset," I said, "and I transferred it, along with every single cent I own, into an irrevocable blind trust. You can't touch it. You can't sue for it. You will never inherit it. But that isn't the financial twist you should be worrying about." Cole took over, driving the final nail into the coffin. "The twist, Mr. Cross, is that you didn't destroy your father's property. You destroyed corporate property owned by one of the largest, most powerful, and most litigious investment firms on the planet. When the police file their report, the victim listed will not be Gideon Cross. It will be BlackRock Global Real Estate." I saw Rachel's legs give out. She collapsed back onto the bench, her mouth open in a silent gasp. "BlackRock doesn't hold family meetings," I continued, my voice hard and remorseless, the voice of an auditor delivering a final report. "BlackRock doesn't accept apologies. BlackRock has an entire division of corporate attorneys whose sole job is to prosecute anyone who damages their assets. They aren't going to drop the charges because you're my son. They don't care about your gambling debts. They will prosecute you to the absolute fullest extent of the law to set a precedent for their insurance adjusters." Travis stared at me, The color had completely vanished from his skin. He wasn't looking at a father anymore. He was looking at the architect of his destruction. Ben Modauja, he whispered, you set us up. You knew all along. I protected my interests, I said. I identified a liability, you, and I removed it from my ledger. You aren't my problem anymore, Travis. You are a corporate write-off, and right now, you are BlackRock's problem. I turned my back on the cell. Dad! Travis screamed. The sound was filled with pure, unadulterated remorse. Dad, don't leave me! I kept walking. I walked out of the detention center, through the long corridors, and into the bright, cold Chicago morning. I left them in the cage they built for themselves, trapped between the law and a mega-corporation with absolutely no way out. The books were balanced, and I was finally free. The elevator ride to the 14th floor of Sovereign Tower was smooth, quiet, and completely solitary. I stepped into the corridor and slid my keycard into the lock of 14B. The light blinked green, a simple mechanical confirmation that I had the right to enter. I belonged here, and unlike the apartment across the street, nobody else had a key. I walked inside. The penthouse was bathed in the soft gray light of a Chicago dawn. It was sterile, yes. The furniture was corporate standard beige, and the art on the walls was generic abstraction. But the air smelled clean. There was no scent of cheap floral perfume, no smell of desperate sweat. It smelled like peace. I walked over to the mantelpiece. Catherine's marble urn sat there completely undisturbed. I placed my hand on the cool stone. I had promised her I would protect our home. In a way, I failed. The physical structure was gone, sold to a corporate conglomerate, the door smashed by a battering ram. But I protected the dignity of our life. I protected the legacy of our hard work from being squandered on gambling debts and renovations we never needed. I saved the essence, even if I had to sacrifice the shell. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I didn't need alcohol. My mind was razor sharp. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. The yellow police tape was still fluttering in the wind around the entrance to my old building. A restoration crew was already unloading gear from a van. BlackRock moves fast. By noon, the door would be replaced. By tomorrow, the walls would be patched. By next week, a new tenant would move in, completely oblivious to the drama that had unfolded across those floors. People always tell men my age that loneliness is the ultimate enemy. They tell us to cling to family, to forgive every slight, to tolerate every disrespect, because dying alone is the ultimate failure. Standing there, watching the city wake up, I realized they were wrong. Loneliness is just a state of being alone. It's neutral. It's quiet. Betrayal, however, is a noise that never stops. It's a rot that consumes you from the inside out. I chose the silence over the rot. Standing here with my accounts secure and my conscience clear, it felt like the best transaction I had ever made. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Cole. Arrangements complete. Bail denied. BlackRock filing civil suit on Monday. I deleted the message. I didn't need to save it. The audit was closed. The file was archived. I sat down in the leather chair, picking up a book I'd been meaning to read for months. I opened to the first page. My name is Gideon Cross. I'm 72 years old. I have no mortgage, no debts, and for the first time in a very long time, I have zero liabilities. I began to read. The room was quiet, and it was absolutely perfect. We are often taught that family is a sanctuary, an unconditional bond that must be preserved at all costs. But I've learned that a toxic family is nothing more than a bad investment, yielding nothing but compounded misery. You can't buy respect, and you certainly can't rent loyalty. When you have to lock your doors against your own children, that is the exact moment you must realize the relationship is dead. True peace doesn't come from a crowded house. It comes from a clear conscience and the strength to close the ledger on people who only see you as a number. If you enjoyed watching this ultimate audit, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of cold justice. Let me know in the comments, would you press charges against your own son, or would you let him walk away?